For me, as a filmmaker and cinematographer, I want to be improving every year on my craft. And I think one of the best ways to do this is actually just give yourself some more time and space.
We're talking about practice.
I had an interview for an upcoming documentary I'm shooting. So rather than trying to just rush to set up this interview the morning of, decided to spend the day before the shoot actually setting up the lighting. Now I had the advantage of doing this because it was in my house. I wish I could talk more about this documentary. There will be more on that soon. There's lots of contracts going right now. We're pitching to Netflix. Promise you, I'll be giving you more behind the scenes on that film. This is kind of the final frame that you're seeing here that we landed on for the interview. And the one key point I really want to come across in this video is the importance of making your light feel naturally motivated. I actually did this whole setup and realized that I had it all wrong. And I'll talk about that in a bit and the steps you can take on set to find out where and how to improve your lighting. Now, full disclosure, Nanlite did provide all the gear in this shoot. They didn't get to approve what I shot and what I'm talking about, but this gear has been provided by Nanlite. You might be thinking this is a bit of a bright room, but I actually have my ISO at 2500 and there is some sunlight coming in there. It's just not a ton. I love my house, but it's darker than I would hope. So just to break down this lighting setup, our key light here, this is actually a Pavo 120C LED panel, which we used the built-in softbox and we punched it through a 5-in-1 bounce, the diffusion out of one of those 5-in-1 bounces. This is about a 5-foot by 3-foot bounce. One piece of advice I can get you is get one of these 5-in-1 bounces no matter what lights you're using and get it about 2 to 3 feet from your key light and you will always get a bigger, softer source that will look more natural. One of my favorite features too on these Nanlites is the fact that they have this cool built-in softbox.
Stop it.
This is super convenient. This was one of my favorite things when I first opened this up. And to break it down, it's that easy. And this is super thin and can pack down into a suitcase, which I have been traveling with these for this film because we've been shooting all around the world for this documentary. And these are coming in very handy. Now this is the 60C, it's a smaller light. I got to use this on the set a bit and I'll talk about that in a minute. The other lights that I was using was a Pavo 2, the 30XR. I typically like to use these as hair lights because they are wider and longer. And this way, if someone's moving their arms, you'll still get a bit of that backlight. Or if you're just using a really focused backlight, it begins to just only show up on certain parts of their body. But fun tip, if you turn an LED vertical, it becomes a hard light. So actually at one point we used one of these Pavo tubes in the kitchen and used it as a kick on this background. That's where you're getting a bit of this hit here on the kitchen. And in some shots you can actually see it on the steps. Just remember that tip. You want a hard light with a tube, go vertical. You want it to be soft, go sideways. One thing I should mention too, the battery is actually built into the Pavo tube. And so we would charge this during lunch, but then when we come to set, we would unplug this and this could just stay on the C-stand, powering itself for up to about an hour, even though we were at full power. And it powered for over an hour, even at full power. Now, I didn't use any fill lights. For me, I typically don't on set. I like to move quicker. I just rather have a bigger, softer wrap lighting and just let there be some more fall off. And then if I am using a tube light, that will also catch a little bit of the side of their face as part of the fill. Now, our background here, this was a 1200 Evoke Nanlux light. Nanlite did not provide this one. I did rent this from Set Ready. They're pretty affordable rentals. You can get them from $100 to $200. If you can't afford renting a Nanlux, we used just a small little 60B Forza Nanlite. This is something I've had from the past, and this actually has a ton of punch. You can see it still hits the background here, very similar to the Nanlux. Now the Nanlux is a way bigger light, and we only had the Nanlux at like 30%. And you'll see that the Nanlux 1200 here actually hit more of the background, whereas when we use the little Forza, it still works, it's just a bit more spotty and doesn't hit as much of the background. But in the end, it did do the trick of what we needed. And speaking of that background, you don't just want to shine a hard light through a window because then it's just this big white square on the wall. Luckily for me, a tree fell, or part of a tree rather, in my backyard the day before. So me and our amazing gaffer, photographer, behind the shooter, all around good friend, Vic Radix.
This is a natural tree that grew here outside of your window.
Him and I took that tree and just leaned it up against my house. You can see it right here in the window. Punching it through a tree feels natural. This looks like there's just a tree on the outside or a bush, and it breaks up the light on the background. I would rather put light onto a wall than actually light my person for backlighting. You can see this light here now on this wall helps separate our subject. Whereas you can see earlier in the day when we were just setting the lights up and we didn't have any light on this background, this is what this room would have looked like without the additional lighting. Just a dark void. Now we could have just added a backlight onto Sammy here to make her stand out. Then it starts feeling lit. It starts feeling less natural. And for me, when I'm making a documentary, I want my interviews to feel as natural as my B-roll. And this is another reason why I like the Nan lights is they have a high CRI rating. This is the color rendering index. This is just essentially how accurate your color is. And from my understanding, anything kind of over 90 is good. And these lights are rated at 96, which is very excellent. You want a higher CRI rating so that you don't have that weird color tint bleeding through the LED lights. Okay, now that I have that cleared out though, now, to get to this stage, there was a few steps along the way. It wasn't as if we just showed up and said, hey, here's our shot. I actually started the day pointing the camera the other direction to the front of my house. The issues here is that I was gonna be fighting these houses in the background where the sun's reflecting off them all day. I don't know, it just feels more messy. And that's when I turned the camera around and saw how much cleaner already this angle was looking without doing any setups. I always recommend this. Just get your camera set up right away and get one light on a stand and start moving around the room to find your angle. Because had I just gone by my own eyes, my instinct, I would have picked the other direction and that wouldn't have worked. Now, this is where we were kind of finding ourselves halfway through the day. At one point, we were using the 60C, the 1x1 as our hair light. But as mentioned, I end up preferring using the tubes just because they have a bigger throw and it kind of looks a bit softer when you go with that vertical format for the tube. And I think a hair light is one of the most crucial lights in the scene. Not crucial that it's necessary, but crucial that you nail it. Sometimes in the past, I've over-exaggerated my hair lights. I've added a ton of backlighting. You can see in the shot here, I have the light way up higher. I was just using the Nanlite app just to control my lights. And when you have the light this bright, it starts to feel like news. Like more of like a classic film set or that she's being interviewed for CNN or something. Hard lighting isn't bad. I'm not ripping on hard lighting. I had hard lighting on the background. Sometimes it's my favorite way to do a key lighting, but I find for the hair light, it might not be the right option unless it feels naturally motivated. You can see with the hair light here, that's it on and off. It's probably only about, actually, I think 11% on the Pavo tube here. And I like it just because it's just adding a little bit of definition in the hair. It's adding a tiny bit on her cheek. It's giving her face just a little more shape. It's not much at all. Like I said, I like mine subtle. Maybe you like yours a bit more strong. And then here's our key light. Now, this is the most crucial step I'm discovering in my cinematography. It's the ability to turn on each light one at a time. Here's our evoke. Then, as I mentioned, here's our hair light, and then here's our key. This is when I suddenly realized I had this scene set up wrong. Watching that key turn on and off on the app was the moment that I realized that this doesn't feel naturally motivated. If you want to have a more natural look, look where the windows are in the room and then place your key lights in a position where a window could be. It's just that simple. But you can even see as I set this up, there's no indication if you were to look at this frame that there would be a window where these stairs are. It actually wouldn't make sense. You're seeing these stairs and kind of a lot of dark space here. It doesn't feel very natural. But we have this big bright window here. It would make more sense that a key light, that there would be other ambient light coming through this window. So this is when I decided that we needed to flip our key lighting. We actually needed to flip the whole angle. Bring our key light now onto the left side and bring our camera from the left side over to the right side so that we're still shooting into the shadow. And this is when I felt that this whole room looked a lot more natural. You let me know in the comments below, which way did you think felt more natural between these shots? In my personal opinion, this just feels way more natural. My eyes immediately believed for some reason that this light here could be lighting her face or another window on that side. Now, since we had the time, I decided to switch out the 120C as our key light and added the 60C, and I was actually pleasantly surprised how well it still worked. I was all ready just to say like this 1x1 light here was gonna be more of a focused light source, but if you go look at our shot, it's actually still casting quite a big amount of light. You can see the hot spot here, but when you throw up the diffusion, that's kind of the key. You can put these lights behind it. And that little light there, like, can pack into a backpack. That might be the move, like when traveling. Very interesting, I'm very impressed. Now, one other quick tip, if you have time, is reposition the person. Don't reposition the lights. Depending where you put your person in relation to your light can completely change how the lights are falling on their face. If you look at me here, I'm very far back. I'm barely getting any shadow on this side. But as I move forward, and I'll move our mic forward, you can see now I'm having a really high contrast ratio. I haven't adjusted any of the lights. All I've done is leaned more forward, and now my key lighting is coming more from the side. Whereas, if I back up here, you can see it's a lot more flat. We had Lauren do this in the shots where we would just move her forward, and you can see each time she moves forward, this shot gets more and more dramatic on her face. I love this lighting. I would use this maybe for a short film. Don't know if I would use it for a documentary, as it's now getting really dramatic. It would have to be maybe perhaps a murder mystery, or she's talking about something dark. For our film, the person who's gonna be in this shot is reminiscing about a family member who's still alive and they're very close. It's just about the competition they're going into. So I don't really need something that dramatic, but it was an interesting exercise just having her move around. In terms of camera gear, I was using the Sigma 28-45. It's one of my favorite lenses now to use for interviews, just because it's that f1.8. Feels like a prime lens, and having that 28-45 allows me to quickly reframe without having to have a higher stop like a lot of zooms are. A lot of zooms just start at 2.8. 2.8 is still great, but sometimes for interviews when I want to get rid of the background, I like getting into that 1.4 or 1.8 range, 2.0, and that's what you can get with that Sigma zoom. So the lessons I've learned on this is, if you can, spend the extra time. Just even do a day at your own house. You don't have to have a shoot. The amount of knowledge I learned from just spending a day lighting, testing out lights that I hadn't used yet, gave me so much more knowledge and confidence of walking into any scenario. I now know what I want to travel with a lot more. I know what works and what doesn't. I know what hair light I want. That way when I come to set, I can make decisions a lot quicker because I have that knowledge. Get out there and practice. This is something that we're always preaching in our Cinematic Eye course. It's why we have so many different mini tutorials about lighting and in different scenarios. And I think it's really important to get out there and actually try them out. Thanks again to Nanlite for providing all these lights. I put some links below to the different ones that I used. I still think my favorite feature on any light I've had this year is this pop-out softbox. That's super handy. Big shout out to Joe Dunn for doing the color on this. I had actually posted some stills from this project on Facebook group for Art of Documentary, and he's an AOD member, and he reached out and did an amazing job on the color for this. You can see more of his work in the description. All right, thank you for watching this. Appreciate it. See you in the next one. Okay, now that I have that cleared out though, like, can you spin that chair?